Let's look at the top problems that make it statistically unlikely that a relationship will succeed, will create a high level of sustainable well-being for both people. Number one, traumatic illiteracy combined with traumatic coping mechanisms. So a trauma is an event that the ego, the I, is incapable of facing alone, and thus develops a distraction, a device, often an addiction, to something that diverts their attention. And the loyalty to a traumatic coping mechanism is almost always higher than the loyalty to the relationship with oneself or another person, which means that as a relationship gets closer together and someone is asked to choose between using their protective coping mechanism to avoid proximity to a triggering event, to trauma, or they must face the trauma in order to connect with a partner, a betrayal occurs. And in a traumatically illiterate culture, that betrayal is taken personally. It's not understood. So one person may feel unworthy, the other person may feel personally betrayed, when in fact both people are betraying the relationship by maintaining traumatic illiteracy and ignorance about the trauma and its protective mechanisms. So if you overcome that with sensitivity, with partnering to steer around the traumatic event, with efforts to heal and integrate the trauma as a couple, which can work. There's EMDR, there's family constellation work, there's therapeutic use of MDMA and variety of somatic exercises. Then there are still other issues. One of them is attachment disorder, and this can tie in with a deeper layer of trauma in the infant period, where some people have been so traumatized through abandonment at a very young and dependent age that they do not trust or want to get close to anyone in order to allow the possibility of re-abandonment. And so there's a standoffishness. Others are incredibly insecure, right? They can be attached, they cannot be attached, but there's a great anxiety and insecurity. And that, in a culture that shames neediness, which is an expression of insecurity, can create, again, another defense, this defense from shame, meaning I don't want to get close to you because then I'll be needy. And in a shame-based culture, then you will reject me precisely because I'm needy, so I'm not going to give you the chance. So another defense. There's also the avoidance dynamic and the chasing dynamic, that can often get someone that is insecure that tries to chase and pairs up often with someone else that's running away. And that dynamic around attachment, where on some level, both people are frightened of intimacy, so someone will chase someone who's not available, and the other person will run from someone whenever they are chased. But if they're not chased, then they're interested. But as soon as someone meets them, then, they run away. And so, that's another common dynamic which we can transcend by becoming aware of the attachment pattern and communicating it and breaking the cycle, both by communication, by being aware of it, by lifting the shame, which has nothing to do with the infant in question or the body. It has, if there is any shame to go around, let's dish it out to the commitment to traumatic illiteracy, which is a cultural phenomena. Then there's also love language and the ignorance around love languages. If both of those two issues are addressed, people explore, express, and look to experience love in different ways. Words of praise, touch, acts of service, logistical support, romantic gifts, and quality time. If you need quality time in order to feel loved, as I do, and someone keeps giving you romantic gifts without the quality time, it doesn't connect. The other person is giving love in their language, but it's not being received as love by the recipient. And so that unconsciousness, the self-centeredness that leads to projecting that everyone else must like what we like is another challenge. There's also the different levels of brain activity, which partly relates to different phases of development. It partly relates to the amount of trauma, but traumatized people tend to have a very active reptilian brain. That's in the fight, flight, freeze protocol. Now, we're naturally driven towards sexuality, to procreate, to explore, to create. When traumatized people explore sexuality, it has a very strong power dynamic of fight, flight, and freeze. I want to be dominated. I want to dominate, because that is the language of the reptilian brain. And that is the predominant brain in traumatized individuals, almost all of us, where that trauma has not been integrated and the blood has lifted through the rational brain into the empathic brain or the transcendent brain. And sometimes highly traumatized people will have, episodes of transcendence, of dissociation and transcendence. But this can create a schism between the idea of friendship and the idea of what it is to be loving with the core sexual drives, which are in a fight, flight, or freeze dynamic, right? I want to possess someone who is frozen. I want to pursue someone who is running. That's where the arousal template is in the reptilian brain. But the idea about love is in the cultural landscape based on a supposition of empathy. But it's not actually where the flow of energy is locked. And so there can be shame around that, confusion around that. I feel aroused by rape. I want someone to witness me or, expose myself and run. I want to be hunted, but that's not my idea of what a friend is or a kind person. It's just what arouses me, right? So there's another, dissociation between the idea of friendship and love and the protocols of the reptilian brain. Also, just the general pervasiveness of shame and judgment, which are both dissociative, are met with a defense of hiding and concealing. I'm not going to tell you what I really want. I'm not going to tell you what I really feel, right? And this is heightened by male chauvinism, right? The idea that to be a really masculine, manly man. One cannot fall apart. One cannot need. One cannot be in a deeply emotional state. There's a lot of contempt in our culture by women towards men that need them, that need mothering, right? So there's a lot of incompetent parenting, which means that there's a lot of grown-up women and men that are looking for the fathering and the mothering they didn't receive, right? If you don't receive that in some form, there is a hunger, there is a void that will look for that continually until it is met. Now, the issue with that in a shame-based culture is that when the little boy, when the little girl reaches out to say, please father me, please mother me, please love me, the cultural backlash is one of contempt and hostility. That's not sexy. I'm not your mother. I'm not your father. Well, what do you do when the psychological age doesn't match the biological age? And what is needed is mothering and fathering. Well, the practical thing to do is to say, okay, if I want a relationship with you, you're going to need some mothering. You still do need some mothering. You're asking for mothering. Okay, am I willing to give you the mothering that you desire? If I am, there's flow. There's chemistry on that level. If I'm not, there's dissociation. I need this, well, I'm not going to give it to you. Similarly, I need a father. I want protection. And if there's contempt around that, go be an independent, go be a mature person, be strong. Or am I willing to be a father? Am I willing to help that little girl calm down and develop a secure attachment? Right? So, there are many areas of psychological illiteracy in our culture, many blind spots, and we're just touching on a few of them, but all of these hurdles need to be overcome in order to tip the statistical odds in our favor, in your favor, to have an exceptional relationship. And there's one more, and it's called skills. And it's not just grasping the skills mentally, it's learning, going through the scrapes, right? You know how to walk, and then you learn to ride a bicycle. You ideally practice with some training wheels, right? That's called a safe space. That's what a group can provide, a safe container. But when you take those training walls off, often there's a few wobbles, a few falls, right? And hopefully someone's there and you're not going too fast. And then you need to get good at riding a bicycle. And once you're good to the point where you can forget about it and just enjoy the bicycle is much faster. It's much more efficient. It's much more enjoyable than walking or jogging. But it's a growth point to that, to reach that threshold of confidence. And as we learn new skills, the skill of self-awareness, the skill of knowing and honoring and communicating and stating boundaries. You just crossed a boundary there. It's not you're not a bad person, but the boundary is here. Right here is the boundary for me at this time. You're still crossing the boundary, right? You're still crossing the boundary. I think I'm going to remove myself, right? Because I'm around someone who doesn't have the skill to honor boundaries. Nothing personal, right? In a culture of violation, you learn how to cross boundaries and have one's boundaries be crossed. You don't learn how to have healthy boundaries, so statistically, you're going to encounter people that do not know what their own boundaries are and do not know how to honor yours any more than they value or honor their own, right? Because they've learned how to cross boundaries. They haven't learned to assert and set boundaries and respect them. So there's also then the art of permission and asking and then the art of observing. And then there's the art of inviting what you want. And each of these things take us into the unknown. And the fear of the unknown is the greatest human fear. The fear of the unknown is the greatest human fear. It's higher than death. Because within the unknown are the horrors that we cannot imagine, are the dreads that we don't dare look at, are the memories we don't want to face or remember, are the secrets that are buried, are the traumas and tragedies that could happen that are beyond our worst imagination. That all lies in the unknown. And in a traumatized culture, with an active reptilian brain, the imagination skews negative. The unknown is, in fact, equal. Because the other side of the unknown is the most amazing success that never occurred to you. A version of yourself that is so ecstatically beautiful, it would be a miracle. It would feel incredibly fortunate to meet that part of you, to have a chance to become that. Our serendipities, our joys, our ecstasies, our growths, our powers within the unknown are positive probabilities and possibilities that are beyond our wildest dream. And in a future-orienting creative framework, i.e., with low trauma and traumatic integration, the imagination skews positive. But the reptilian brain always is 5 times more negative. And the way to tell if you're primarily in future dreaming brain, frontal cortex and frontal lobes and all, that type of state, or whether you're mostly in the reptilian territory is this. When somebody pays you a compliment, "Oh, you look very nice tonight. You look lovely tonight." Do you let that in and dwell on that and ignore people's criticism? Or can you receive compliment after compliment after compliment after compliment after compliment? And then one person says, "Oh, their breath smells bad." And then you spend the whole night dwelling on that. So statistically, we as a culture amplify the negative 500% more than the positive. If one bad thing is going on, we dwell on it over and over again. That's a traumatically active brain. And the unknown is filled with negativity, 50%, and positivity, 50%. It's completely neutral. But a highly active reptilian brain is going to look at everything that could go wrong when you take a risk, when you jump, when you try something new, when you put on a blindfold, when you follow an unknown path, when you learn a new skill. What if I look like a fool? What if I look... And so you have to enter the unknown in order to go to a new group, in order to meet a new person, in order to go online and make yourself visible, in order to shake hands, in order to share something vulnerable, in order to practice a new skill. And if your brain is primarily reptilian, you're not going to do it. It's going to be too scary to go into the unknown. So you have to face that to get to a level where you're willing to try something, and you have to try it a lot to get good enough to where the bicycle is actually better than walking. Because when you're still falling over and scraping your knees, it's not better than walking, it's worse. And that confidence comes from experience and comes from practice. And once you arrive at this wonderful point, right? Traumatic literacy, you know your love language, practicing skills, you understand your attachment territory, you're willing to break free of the cultural taboos and be seen and be visible, be politically incorrect at times in order to be yourself. You know what you're doing. Now, you're in 1%, 2% territory, right? You're in a distinct minority that can do things that most of the population cannot do, will not do. And so the next job becomes finding other people like yourself, and that's one of the great benefits of a group, but also helping people cross the bridge to where you are, to go from ignorance and shame about trauma to awareness to healing, to go from ignorance about love language to understanding and communicating and negotiating around love language, to go from not understanding attachment templates to understanding and navigating attachment templates. To go from not knowing how to do these skills to practicing those skills, falling off the bike, and then helping them up rather than leaving them to rush off because they don't want to look like an idiot. That's the journey of mastery. Because once you can reach that level, now the odds are in your favor. But you've got a small group of people to select from. Once you master the next level of skill, which is coaching and careful selection and discernment, and making people feel safe that they won't be shamed, now you've got the whole world available to you as a possible partner. So that's the path of skill, that's the path of learning. And that's what the group is about. But there's also another path that runs parallel to this, and it's the path of self, the path of presence, the path of grace. And this is the path of acceptance and witnessing. Acceptance and witnessing the entire world that lives within each one of us in the internalized dialogue, our parents, and through our parents, our cult and culture. We have the world inside of us, in the mirror neurons of our brain. And as we learn to witness all of those conversations without judgment, make peace with the part of us that is the perpetrator, the villain, the victim, the helpless one, the aggressive one, the sociopath. It's all inside of us. Because we've seen all of those sides in the culture around us. We've had to develop a relationship, a relay of energy. And when we can learn to see and understand, and to love and support all of that inner voice inside of us, we can be at peace and accept ourselves, and we no longer need to change ourselves. At that same time, we no longer need to change other people. At that point, love is everywhere. Because no matter which part of ourself comes up as a dialogue, there's a witness, there's a self there capable of loving it. And no matter what comes towards us in life, there's a part of us capable of discerning and loving that person. And this is when the world becomes okay. Because every single moment is a chance to witness, a chance to love, a chance to hold space in presence for what is. And that is a state in which we no longer need a relationship. That is a state in which we no longer need to hide. That is a state in which we no longer need to change someone else so that they are good enough for us to conditionally love and get close to and feel safe with. And so that is another key that opens up the world to us, to being in a loving relationship with life, with all that is, with God, Goddess, all that is, with earth, with heavens, with all the polarities, the old and the young, straight and the homosexual, the women, the men. That's a state of presence, that's a state of grace, which we can feel for 5 minutes, we can feel for a minute here and there, but as we cultivate through presence, through awareness, through meditation, that state, we have it all each moment. The world and life is so incredibly abundant. And when we can be with what is in a state of blessing, of gratitude and love, then we are overflowing in our effective relationship with everything.